tenita da pa me ko ta yakale yo ba chudo na ba tamana ta si dile shu 네 가당 단수 고바 쪽만이랑 가시 수에 네 잠도로 토고 했더니 잠도로 들이더래 사랑 개발 잠도 개발 인송애들이 될라 롱데 망보여야 돼 같이 다다 되는 라니게 되나 오 들이 잠도 뭐 이럴 때서 하고 그러지 그런 라니게 되는 다인데 땅도 남박 차집에 잠도 있는 잠도로더니 양딱고 잠도로 때서 받아 잠도 니 이거래 돼 가니 뭐 이럴 때 다톡 산지지 고만 먹는 잠도고 산지 고쳐문에 저는 나 산지 고만 토게 나 대화 좀 산지 나 산지에 토바데 속에 동네 오 샘지가 동네 산지 고만 토바데 샘지가 동네 코다 차대 요리 다 땅에 다 산지 좀 맞다 방만 거 사지치도 도저히 저런 거 살펴보려는 나게 좀 롤라 피스 사지는 사지 고마 톱이 죽어요. 샘지 톱이 피고도. 걔는 동문이 샘지고 잡으러요. 잡던 돈에 대 많이 받으니까 이제 접지 잡으러 문이 잡으러지. 제대 제대 잡도 성아 다제 대설이 라면서 봐 착이요면 그런 타통 제외양들이 사지에 고만 먹고 그래. 그 매니저들이 게다 탐시에 없던 거지. 뭐 빠게 제발은 가까이 대서 제발 요사를 좀 다시 하고 말이 거기지. 그런 거 썼다도 나무 잡래상 대서 우리 되는 잡도 만나네. 문제 잡도 저쪽 잡도 그래서 제디케에서 많이 받으니 사지 공방을 그냥 이동을 매니저들이 잡던 돈은 들이 잡도 양탁광을 배제다를 대대 개발이더니 나무 잡도랑 개발됐다고 요래지.
Dashidele to my Dharma friends and joining on the live stream for the Amitabha 100 Million Mantra Recitation Retreat. So yesterday I shared a few words about the Gongchik, and we came to the refuge. So the verse said, the difference between non-Buddhists and Buddhists is the taking of refuge. And so generally, there are many different opinions about that, or ways to see it. And so from my own perspective, when we take refuge, and really what determines refuge, rather than Buddhist or non-Buddhist, is to understand why are we taking refuge? What is our goal of taking refuge? And so therefore also within the Buddhist refuge, even if we take refuge in a Buddhist tradition, there is a pure and an impure way of doing that. And so the authentic way of taking refuge is with ultimate enlightenment in mind. Then the impure way of taking refuge is to think that I want to attain enlightenment, I want to be happy, and that's why I can go for refuge. So why do we want to attain enlightenment? It is only for the benefit of sentient beings. And also in our refuge prayer, the last line in our refuge prayer says, may I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. So what is the point of attaining enlightenment? It is so that we can benefit sentient beings. And so any motivation that seeks protection from any fears and troubles in this life, and any motivation that is worldly in this way, is not an authentic motivation for taking refuge. So whatever virtue we practice, actually, whether we take refuge or practice any virtue, we should always have ultimate enlightenment in mind. And so maybe that is a point that some do not understand so clearly, that taking refuge in itself, even though it is a Buddhist refuge, there is still a difference within a Buddhist refuge. And one should never take refuge with an intention for any worldly gains, like protection from fear, but only with enlightenment in mind and the benefit of others. And so that would then become an authentic way of taking refuge.
Tela Jobson Roa, Tela, number 2 money Bagare. Jobson Roa, Injim, Jobson Roa, Jobuna, Semti go, Semti Vasha, Dajin on it. Joseph de Saje, some chitty, Tambo, Jacho Gari, Tambo Sancho to talk this song. Jobson Roa, Sancho took the Semti, I'm just doing cover doing the Sunday. This day to the Tambo Jobson Roa, Semti to the Jobson Roa, and the Semti Pimpers, Tambo Sancho to the talk to song. Oh, that saved me by Jago, Tambo Saba saved me by the Semti, Dungi, Shippersta, Kumjong Pamasa, Saji Catherine Potere. The Kumjong Pangona Kari, the Batiam Masai gave up on top of Jason. The Batiam and the gave up on top of Jason. They got the day Tamchetri, didn't Ramjigo was Saji Common Toguna, the Batiam Masai didn't know Matans, give up on the Pimpasa corner dirt, Luma is of Goni. Then it didn't Ramji, Tata was doing Joguna Tata doing the Kang Jong. Ramji Casa, Danji, you were Chanangale, Chanang to what take less at the Bacha Jargon. Didn't draw talk the Montok, coming, taking you know, part of the Samato Lassa was only Tato Muda de San Jason and Miller. Didn't David Chibo Jamdo was that Chibo, get a chunk to get a Chibo chat away. The same Chiba, same Tomachi only. Nam Kreka chap, Sibjika chap, Lenam Pachaka, Lenam Kachaka charity, the me chamdo. This all coming, that is same day. They are the same with all, the mere same with all. They are same day, that would do it. Dandy, they are the Dandy, that's a mazoli. Dandy is on the Tamboran sent the Amazon, Dandy Mivajani. This day, Chatawa Charlie, this year, Chakama Chatagori. They are the same about Achimore. Same Tibaraka, that Toman is about Semi Passon. Somebody come to Jago. That's the Gilly, Domarsam, doing it Jokanso, sometimes Jellyson song. That just dancing is of Till Mark, dancing Mark Palazon. Don't let any dancing you with the Sajikono, Dagi Niva, Dagi Meva, don't talk to Jill. There is not Thomas Saji, Tatawati, totally. Just to do I agree. They Sanjay Lampi, they will Sanjay Damasonti, Hako Mari. Oh, with the Jackson Drove, got the same Chibas already. Same deep on the Gino, the other was Sanjo to it. Simply that we did on 3 Sanjay, Tamis or Tosa, some 3 parts of Madani, part of the Samato go Tosa, Nang Yore. They were at the Yanda Zoko Sanjo to Kali Jetta Jagan, Tungi Yidu Kola. Kalejadi, Yidu Kalejan, 3 round to get on that Tato. So now, since I have a teacher Sanjay, Tato Rang Sanjay Tongo, never would do it of the Dewa just to go. There is the Tablo Chepartini, the town to Sentiba, Sentiba, Nyamta Libe County, Donge Dewa Tap. There are some countries, that's the Tabmakami, but there's some Sobzani, Sotarga Garden Pamza, Sansi and Hadi, Mountain Tatani. There are some roundabout, Rankatawa, Rangi, Sembin, Salamgamba, Ramantomi, and Yamtaninja. They have been Salamgamba and Kali. Pochunga Poshu said to her. Machibol, Machibisi to law. There is a part of the Tolote, to Lord over the Rang Tapachi body, not to watch him in Indian. Sent it to watch him moment, to watch him to Marie. The ticket to watch him, save the car. Tapachi, Tung Chipa, the Tapachim dog on a soul rebellion. Taki Bete jumps over us. Tapachi boy in the center jumped out of it. Manam Hanayam sent in Tapji. Donge Jogo, some Tilo de Tata Santos and Batunjo, Last one, Monam, Carrot Town, sent you Connie, to that song, Tesson. They were to keep as a jump on the sent it jumped on Angie, then email a chat, they were 특집에서 좀 특과 정말 봐주셔야 되는 다 체인데 력적 레붕 때라서 봐서 다 잘도 마시나 나 찍고 체도 찍고 같이 했다 나사를 보러 나 체인들 마시러 들어보지 가지고 지금 내니 월 마시러 탑을 라면 거리는지 레디 월이 마셨나요? 저 남주 마셔 사던 거 밖에 장해야 돼 셜락까지 찍거든 셜 답지 가로 대사 못하는 들이 잠도 양타 감마다 레 지성 제일을 하고 그래. 들이 잠도 오는 들이 다가 이제 조금 문제게 잠도 도망만 많이 봐. 제대로 많이 봐. 남바 살be 잠도 양타 빠져가리. 따다다 습지도 따다 롤업해서 사진을 봐. 다도 사진 거면 맞네. 들이 국수는 청청사나 사진 거 네. 사진도 봐. 호세시를 시에요. 제가 대교고요래. 그래서 다도 물다 되는데 수능 돌아야 매와. 저는 총총사 침볼이 열다봐. 이 타락이 되게 해봐 망보요래. 저 땅이 들이 선한 제발이야送的. 나봐 나고 잡고 잡선도로 제발 대답을 요래 돼.
What is special about the Buddhist refuge is that when we go for refuge, in the beginning we must cultivate a mind of bodhicitta. And for whose purpose is that? It is for the purpose of others. And this was the intention of all the Buddhas after 3 times. So no matter in what kind of tradition we take refuge, really it is important to cultivate a mind of bodhicitta that aims for complete enlightenment. And so that means that when you take refuge, you first bring to mind the suffering of sentient beings in samsara, and then go for refuge in order to liberate them from suffering. So, therefore, in the beginning, we must cultivate immeasurable love, understanding the suffering of others. The Buddha actually said in the very beginning, first you must recognize suffering, and then next you must abandon the origin of suffering. So what is the origin of suffering? The Buddha also said, do not commit any wrong, perfectly practice virtue. So the origin of suffering comes from committing wrong with afflictive emotions. And in order to attain a state of enlightenment, naturally we have to abandon non-virtuous conduct and engage in virtuous conduct. And that is what the Buddhas have done. They first cultivated this mind of enlightenment, of bodhicitta, and then for the sake of others only, they made great effort with the body, speech, and mind. So we want to become protected from suffering when we go for refuge. So first we need to understand where does suffering really come from. It arises from self-grasping, which leads to the afflictive emotions, attachment and anger and so forth. And then we act driven by these emotions. We accumulate karma, which leaves habitual imprints in our mind. And then as a result of having developed the 6 afflictive emotions, we take birth anywhere in the 6 realms of samsara. So as an antidote to that, the Buddhas have engaged in the activities of the 6 paramitas and so forth, always having ultimate enlightenment in mind. If ultimate enlightenment is the goal, then even a small virtue can become a great virtue. So when we cultivate bodhicitta, we reflect that wherever space pervades, sentient beings pervade. Wherever sentient beings pervade, their karmas and habitual tendencies pervade. And wherever that pervades, suffering pervades. So suffering pervades wherever space pervades. So you bring to mind the suffering of sentient beings. And those suffering or happiness, everything depends on the mind only. So it is all a state of mind. So the mind of sentient beings is a mind of self-grasping, which is like polluted water or the ice block that first needs to be purified. When one practices bodhicitta, the mind becomes like hot water that melts the ice block, and then one is also able to melt the ice blocks in the minds of other sentient beings. So what is this mind generation of bodhicitta? It is immeasurable love. Immeasurable love arises when we bring to mind the suffering of all sentient beings. It is said that everything arises from causes. When the cause is self-grasping, then an ignorance, then the result will be suffering. So actually in reality, even though we grasp at a self and other do not actually exist. But sentient beings have not realized that. And so that is why when we often take refuge, we don't really understand the significance or the real meaning of taking refuge, the purpose. And when somebody goes for refuge in a true, genuine way, they do so with a mind of bodhicitta that seeks the benefit of others. And this is what the Buddhas have done. They first cultivated bodhicitta, and then they accumulated merit throughout 3 endless aeons, accumulating merit such as practicing the 6 paramitas. And that has resulted in their attainment of complete enlightenment. So the Buddhas made great effort, exerted themselves only for the benefit of others, and not in order to protect themselves from suffering. And so that is where the difference comes in. Also in a prayer it is said, "May I attain enlightenment in a single lifetime," which is the endless accumulation of merit. So it is the endless accumulation of merit, this motivation of the Buddhas. Temporarily, through that motivation, we are able to transform suffering into happiness, and ultimately we attain enlightenment. So bodhicitta must be the foundation of any Dharma practice. It is a method to transform all suffering. The secret mantra Vajrayana path is a path that is rich in skillful means, requiring the least difficulty. According to the Pratimoksha or individual liberation path, and there is an emphasis on abandonment. And in the Bodhisattva path and the Vajrayana path, we engage in actual practice of looking at the mind, the afflictive emotions, the view, the natural state of the mind. And this is how we gradually progress along the stages and the paths. And so what that also means is that we need to practice according to where we are at on the path. For example, if a small child needs to wear the clothing of a small child and cannot wear an adult's cloak. And similarly, an adult wears larger clothing. So we need to train the mind. There's no point in just saying, I am a Mahayana practitioner. Just the words, I am a Mahayana practitioner, do not actually make you one. What makes you a Mahayana practitioner is the mind. In the Great Liberation Sutra, it says the mind of a Mahayana practitioner is like an ocean, like a vast ocean, because they think of all mother sentient beings. They want to liberate them all from suffering. You understand that when you recite prayers such as the Bodhicharya Vatara or the King of Aspiration prayers for excellent conduct and so forth. So when we read these prayers, we reflect only on the welfare of others, of sentient beings. So such a mind that is like an ocean, the Mahayana mind, is free from any self-grasping. And then the quote continues, it says, the mind of one of the inferior vehicle is like the water that collects in the footprint of a cow, of a cow's footprint. So it's not very much. So that is similar to a motivation that takes refuge only for the benefit of this life or to be protected from fears and trouble and so on. But it's basically only for oneself. For example, sometimes people come to me and say, "Oh, Rinpoche, I have this sickness, this disease. Please do something, give me a method so I be free from this, protect me from this, or give me refuge." They can't really help it because they don't really understand. But really the truth of the matter is that if you have accumulated the karma, then you will also have a certain disease. And if it's the karmic time to die, then you will die. But then what is the Buddhist way of approaching this is, so what do we do after we die? What happens after we die? What happens to the consciousness after we die? So that is important to recognize. So in any case, when we go for refuge, there are different levels of taking refuge. And even within the Buddhist tradition, there are more authentic and inauthentic ways of taking refuge. So the authentic way is to take refuge for the sake of all sentient beings, for the benefit of all beings. And also when we just engage in a small meritorious deed, we should dedicate it for the sake of the enlightenment of all sentient beings. Otherwise, a lot of our merit will actually go to waste. But if enlightenment is our ultimate goal, then even a very small merit can be transformed into a great merit. So that is the special way of the Buddhist refuge.
대외 특별 최종 개발 선지인들이 책을 돈이 동하고 요래 그래서 뉴몽마디 domsan ne 찍송 지송 뭐 강이 주봉제는 뭐니 볼때 뉴몽바 인기 뭐 빵거 빵와 탑들이 탑이 제발 소설그 빵와지 상생이 저와지 상하고 냠틀린 봤음 대선 람거는 맞지 람티 요래 대회는더니 저와디 다 특별 치보는 상속설명때 저와디 강이 나한테 생을 소화지 깨고 강이 생그 단지 뉴몽과 생그 시합고 또고 hingi게 또고들이 저들하고 저텀들이 소화돼서 깨고 그래 당연히 저 무슨 냠니게만 담제 쌍못 땅나 오 따뜻히 배세 담도데 가리다 그래야지 따따 뭐 사바세미데 쌍못 땅나 사바세미데 쌍못 땅나 우리 셈지를 내는 것들에 노가를 도스스 등에서나 조정나게 셈처럼 뭐주고 소화찌게 배나 녹지 빠져는 뭐지 손에 미성습 등이 발쇼스 토리성 등이 로마의 등이 이제 쪽벌선 공유바 차도거든 문이 삼모서 대도 등이래 대로 산지가 도만 등이 시발사 지 등이 시네 오다디 등이 시는 내가 저 가리 딱금 용사로 땅 뉴먼 말이지 뉴먼도 참아 가는 제시도 딱 다니니서 다 등에 말에 담디 놀이서 드리즈다 냐는시 잡술 나하지네 다디 갈려고 나오냐 반디리 들려고 거요 대외라 특별히 선지 줄에서 삼바세미 세대 있기나 다다 알디들이야 잠벌인데 등이 털래 버려 초록 버려 세지 소자 차서 등이는 등이 씹어서 뒤콩 아니 센쪽발이 루쪽발이 코랑 나지도 거네 벨로도 주고 가서라 딱 당국강이 가리도 각세 요리 야들이 따서 노아를 소시 등에를 삼모다나 폴섬 등에를 삼모다나 들이 마주 등에를 단 잡은 거 삼모다나 다다 내 양들 막 같이 있어서 야다 내조 이렇게 탈들이 양 투바하는 들이 마세 작동들이 양까지 세가도 왜 투바잖아요 같이 세가도 등이 반이들이 약합이 지고 서울에 왔든지 받쳐 중에 초와 매일 강에 가야죠. 내 몸 손섬 뒤쪽으로 됐다 원정 볼까니 들이 뒤에 답지 세바고 매일 제게 오래지. 뭐지 다 답지 샘 가래리 따뜻 단지리지. 맞지부지 약고 제고스. 이깔 정말 정시. 너 미리 따도 뭐 생각이 상로 땅을 다 데리고 상로다. 대래 다때 단지 중요 뭐 중대래 대래 산지를 산속생주 미 대다로 산속생주 차서 좋아하면 최소한들이 랑 최소 다치 가려는 서 세르둥이 가로 때도 등이 찍고 찍다 요리지. 싸움부터는 때려버리 제거리라 말이야. 예tuk제 말이야. 예tuk 말이야. 대회를 때렸더니 샘기바지는 다 됐다고 산속섭에서 지지나 이제리 사바세미 삼았다네 고블록들이랑 그 파마 맞이바 직장매바 고속부터나 대들은 이제리 거기 대들 내랑 유몽동에 때려 싸움으로는 처음 수업받지네 대신 잡을링에 등에 강나 등에 오나 소소로 등에 강양매나 등에 처리거리 어때 처리 따지 사바세미로 갔다 알이지 사바세미 당연히 샘지 잠쳐요 강이 강하면 도 나라 강에 봐야면 잡을 강나 등에는 나라 등에 용도 띠까리 다 생문대로 샘지 바래 샘지래 딱 강나 등에는 처리돼 다뒤 등에는 매번 탑 가르치고 다지 나디 쪽에서 뒤니 몸을 애기다 레지 메인 거래 뒤 마사바 탑 가리 따따다 사족 샘지래지 사족 샘지가 나디 매바지는 다 등에 탐진 차롱도 그래지 때리들이 저거 토니들이 샘지 탐지 등에 로토고 도시 대들 마가와나 마드로와나 조금만큼 오고들 이 새로 소화되는 저는 너는 특히 배세 잡토는 소화처럼 돌디나 그래 잡을래는 등에 소름 거리 최총마도 소름 거리 예지도 게 소고요리 대손나 다 샘지 잡토는 잘해 말이 랑소소 랑이 보다 주마 다 때문에 가시 파마로 써야 메리오래 다시 가해 다 샘지 저랑 샘지 가해 다 차공난 차도 없어 하고라 다 사족 생구 용띠는 나디 중들이 하고라들이 특히 배세 사족 생구 용띠 샘지 잡토는 차대요래시 뭐데 간에 오는 때 샘지 지속 폐기요래시 샘지 탐제라 예비집에 잡고 요래 취지된 가서 이놈이 옆방으로 그래 대성은 특히 배세 잡소 특과 좀 봐지죠 대리 세명당도 싸우나다나 대리 다 특과 지속적으로 샘지 봐라 샘지들랑 내일 민도 그러면 소리도 그러면 대들랑 소소다 그래 각 샘지 이제 배그 말에 대든 그 샘지 깨고 다 저거 맞지어는 지저지 봐도 마음에 봐는 샘지들 다 소장 나서면 그 빨리 샘지도 쏘래지 내 강의로 소타이로 상하이로 가리는 샘지들이 조금 될 때는 이때서 특히 제보서 내가 정말 샘지 막 가르쳐 다마스티브 다들 삼지 깨거든 파마를 삼지 깨녀리데 다마스티브 삼지 하탄 고보래 대학과라 접상도 다들 지하마 따라는 파마는 하장 치에 저 하장 치에 그 파마 니 로탐지 따뜻다 꼬라다로 따뜻다 달게 요래지 파자니 닝기자 차니 척잖아 따베르 때다 이제 레저랑 살 따파마도 다들 쏘차들지 뭐지 송래 파차사지 말아다 가면하다고 пар나라서 때서 좀 레시 하나 망을 뒤따워지는 뒤를 렘제죠 따따단 또 삼바 세미를 깨지 하나 그리버래 들이 대 삼바 세미 서로도 고아서 잘 맞지나 따따물는 동에 동에 저도 다지지 다지는 이보다 산속성이지 라니 탑지게도 그죠 들이 촌에더니 다지지를 주는 따서 나 잡고서 뒤는 안 되는 나만 지어다 샘지 탐지는 자수 로고 선미 들이 잡도 양다과 잡도 샘지 양도 연구요래 뒤에서 독상한다는 냠룡을 때리더니 뭐가 냠룡들 들어와서 뭐 대학교 가르치사래서
Next verse says, the difference between Hinayana and Mahayana is the cultivation of bodhicitta. So Jigten Sumgön also said in a different verse that the 3 levels of vows have a single essence. And then he also said that the 84,000 Dharma teachings are all an antidote to the afflictive emotions. So we must abandon the afflictive emotions, no matter what path we enter. When we enter the path of individual liberation, the pratimoksha path, and then we speak about abandoning the afflictions. In the bodhisattva path, we speak about transforming the afflictions. And in the Vajrayana path, we engage in practice, we practice with the afflictions. So whichever of the three levels of the path one takes, one must abandon the afflictive emotions. So in the bodhisattva path of the Mahayana, we transform the afflictive emotions. And so what does that mean? It means that an actual feeling has to arise in our minds. And the feeling arises when we think about the suffering of others. So first, there is self-grasping in the afflictive emotions in our mind, and then we bring into mind the suffering of others, and then through the power of your own awareness, your wisdom, and your compassion, your own self-grasping and the afflictions become transformed. So through the power of compassion, the afflictions become transformed. So for that to happen, you first have to develop an actual feeling. And so a practitioner should also really reflect on this quote we just mentioned, that the mind of a practitioner of the lower vehicle is like the water collecting in the footprint of a cow. So how does that really look like? And how does the mind, which is like an ocean, look like? So first we have to cultivate immeasurable love. For that we have to bring to mind the suffering of sentient beings in the 6 realms and really think about it in great detail, each of the sufferings they experience. For example, as it is described in the dedication prayer of the Bodhicharya Vatara. When you think about their suffering and how it really is for them, then an unbearable feeling of compassion should arise. Dzogchen Patrul Rinpoche had said, now let alone the suffering in the 3 lower realms. If you just think about even the suffering in the higher realms, for example, the human realm, it already can turn one crazy if you just think about the suffering, the intense suffering that just humans experience. So that is why the Buddha said, first you have to recognize suffering. And then, once you have recognized suffering, what do we do about it? What is the cause of suffering? So the Buddha said, then you must abandon the origin of suffering. And the origin of suffering are the afflictive emotions, and they all arise from self-grasping. All suffering, without exception, comes from wishing for one's own happiness. So when we wonder of how does this self-grasping really manifest, it is this belief in the true existence of a me, I really exist. So one who practices according to the Mahayana path, instead of that, first they cultivate a mind of immeasurable love. And in order for that to arise, they have to think about the suffering, for example, of all the people in this world, all the beings in this world, so that a real feeling arises. When you think about the suffering of all the animals, for example. So this is how we recognize suffering. We bring an animal to mind, for instance, and then we reflect, actually we are the same. Our minds are one and the same. Our physical experience of suffering is the same. For example, animals, sometimes they freeze and they are eaten and so forth. They experience a lot of suffering. So just think about just the suffering of the higher realms. For example, the human realm in this world. For example, nowadays, we have been through a pandemic, and how much suffering was that? How many people have died? And then on top of that, some people were able to avoid getting sick through the pandemic, the virus, and then they went and made wars with other countries, and then they killed other people. On top of there being a pandemic, they go and kill other people. And then that kind of fighting and warfare creates obstacles to, for example, the trade between countries. And then people have no food to eat. And so actually what we are witnessing here is famine, warfare, and disease all happening at the same time. And how does that happen? It's not really a certain person, but it's the mind, a state of mind. And it's the mind of self-clinging, thinking that I want the best for myself. And in order to get that, one treats others like they're objects or like not living things and does anything to them. So the fault of all that is just the afflictive emotions and self-grasping. Now, if one possesses bodhicitta, one would recognize that how much other beings suffer from that kind of warfare and disease and so forth. Because we can take our own life as an example. How much would we suffer? How would it affect us? How much would we suffer if we had to go through all of that? And they experience the exact same suffering as we would. And so it is just that certain people are unable to think that way, and then they cause a lot of harm towards others. Now, if you have bodhicitta, then from the perspective of the relative bodhicitta, you would first recognize that all of these beings have been my parents in a previous life. So you cultivate immeasurable love. And then when you think about the suffering that all these parents experience, an unbearable feeling arises. When you think about all the suffering just in this world, each of the suffering that people and beings experience, even though you yourself may not experience any suffering currently, even though you might be fine, when you think about all of the suffering of others in the world, then a feeling of suffering still comes to you. And that is a sign of love for others, of immeasurable love. And then your mind really has become this Mahayana mind, which is like an ocean. So you might feel that it is strange, even though I have no problems, I have no difficulties. When I think about the suffering of others in the world, it makes me suffer. And why is that? It is because I care about them. So a feeling really arises. And then once that feeling arises, you also then think, what can I do to help them? And why are they suffering? It is not a certain person, but it is the fault of the afflictive emotions, of self-grasping. And when the karma of afflictive emotions ripens, it ripens into such suffering. And so what do these beings need? They need love. So if you cultivate bodhicitta for them, self-grasping will go away. Their suffering is like an ice block. So this is how we can liberate others from suffering on the basis of causes, eliminating the causes of suffering. So we liberate sentient beings in a gradual way. There's this prayer that goes, may I liberate those not liberated. May I release those not released. May I give breath to those without breath. And that's also related to that verse from the Great Liberation Sutra we just mentioned. So in brief, we must bring to mind the suffering of all beings. And then a feeling arises in your mind. Normally, ordinary people only think about their own surroundings, like their own children and spouses and so on. And some people even feel no love for their own parents. And that state of mind is like an ice block. So this is, when you reflect in this way, this is how you can understand the qualities of bodhicitta and the faults of self-grasping. And even if you do not have many abilities to help others, if you have a mind of bodhicitta, that mind will pervade others and it will benefit them. As a person who possesses bodhicitta will naturally accomplish the benefit of others and will naturally refrain from harming others. So think about this quote over and over again, all these quotes we just mentioned. And look at your own mind. Have I really cultivated a feeling of bodhicitta, of love for others or not? There is no point in just leaving it with words and speaking about bodhicitta, but it's something that actually has to arise. That's why in our prayer we say, may bodhicitta arise where it has not arisen, may it further, where it has arisen, may it not decline, may it ever further increase. And actually, in all the 3 levels of the path, Pratimoksha, Bodhisattva, and Vajrayana, this mind generation of bodhicitta is really important, and especially when we practice the Vajrayana. So this is how Lord Chikden Somgun had now explained the meaning of the Mahayana. So the difference between the Mahayana and the Hinayana is the cultivation of bodhicitta. And also Chikden Somgun, elsewhere he taught what is called the great bodhicitta, the cultivation of great bodhicitta, or the great cultivation of bodhicitta, which is a very unique way of practicing bodhicitta, because it puts our enemies first. First, we have to cultivate love for our enemies. So most people are able to cultivate love for their parents, but it's very difficult to cultivate love for our enemies. You hardly find anyone who is able to do that. So in order to be able to do that, we have to understand where enemies come from. In a previous life, enemies have been our very kind parents or a dear friend, someone who had loved you very much. And that love was not repaid, and it was we encountered this love with hostility, and now the karma comes around and they arise as an enemy in this lifetime to collect their karmic debt that we owe them, and then they cause all kinds of harm as enemies in this lifetime. But all of these enemies actually have been someone extremely loving and kind in a previous life. There's also this story where, again, Omniscient Master says they eat the flesh of the father and beat the mother. There's this story, Rinpoche didn't explain it, but in our previous life, they were our kind parents, but in this life, we eat their flesh and we beat them. So in any case, love, immeasurable love is most important. And even if you just have an understanding of that at this point, it's very beneficial. If you understand the importance, then you will bring to mind the suffering of sentient beings in this world, for example, and then recognize that the cause of their suffering is self-grasping. The antidote is bodhicitta. So it's really necessary that a real feeling arises in your mind, a real feeling of the suffering of others. So then you can see for yourself, have I cultivated an authentic refuge or not? So I have taken refuge, but is there still some kind of selfish concern in there, or is it really for the sake of all sentient beings? So that is something I'd ask you to reflect on very carefully and really gain an experience in. Because as we mentioned before, meditation practice must be infused with experience.
특파 제비 셈 지을 제니 드니다 노당 하지 제바 왕이 대성 마 지바디 소상 소탈상 신상 쓰면은 마 지바디 가리 하장상화 지보레스 하장상화 지보레 시부터 말레스 시부터가 강리 란게 셈드 상제이 마 된 것이 있다고요 말이야. 대마시 말이지. 뭐 시선은 맨가리 남지 이시선 보지. 말아리 비 남지 마음통 이신통 다 깝들이 따상하 하고서 가자 뒤에 다 왕요래지. 노소로 왕매 사생전 왕매 상하 하나 왕요래지. 왕지 되는 왕지 바지 르바라랑 톱 말아리 비서는 범파치 소도 줘봐 새 왕지 라르 라거도만 나가 왕지 범파치 소도 야니 소소라는 게르 통감 잼치 탐치 레지드 살로다나 대탐치 산속템다 들어서 다 파사는 저도 그래서 마미나 Nimo lesson drawer don't chum yours. They bang something, Tati don't see that people on the angel. Mean to mean it, that trouble on that Lago Macata, Tayam get last of all. That's a hard Sanjo yours. There's the Pongan City, Mambo, the one, Pumbo, the Pumadi. Tell me what it is. Semi Pumondo in 90, Napsi is, and Napsi in neither. Napsi is in Pong, 3 times in larger joy. Very shank to Bocabotina, made a drink to some manager. They don't ship on it. Done, somehow the Hako, not body, some of the Hako something. Oh, Napsi is in Pong, died one of yours. One is that around top dinner. Report around top dark. That you want the togres, you want the togre, togin and Sahabi. Sotalan you want Bamas, Sansin and Javas, Sanhabi Shivas, you want Shiba. Gandhi, you know what way she thanks you, Boyina, rather 7 Nero Hakuna. They looked on the shirap on the maid, the Malari Pede, they looked up upon the shiraps of our own measure. She had the part of the Savannah, they looked at what there is. They thought carry pengar there. Tanya should just to your day. They jerked him a top rank at chairs on the report on a bed. She don't ship around, got to the tavern on a yawn. She don't tell me about Sarton. She don't use easy, Sarton Chadi. She don't use easy Hako. Jin dancing with dying email. There she don't Sarton, they, Nangitini. You won't talk about the issue on a minute to go away. They make it a particular quarter on top of the thing on me. Got the top one is, oh, can't that one go to the tree. Report Dory to what on your arms on my life. But I just thought that you were say one to run, Lagotoman, Nago one. They look Dory to what on your don't you want to eat in the quarter on top of the quarter on top of the one take it. Miss Jegata, one to see it, Jenna ragged one top sana, 3 one top where the Venetina, no honey came out 1 race.
So then when the Mahayana mind has arisen within one, and next it says, the next verse, the difference between the mantrayana and the sutrayana is empowerment. So we have the 3 levels of the path of the Patimoksha, Bodhisattva, and the Vajrayana. And within that we have the Vajrayana, which is the secret mantra path. And so why is it called secret mantra? It is because it is an extremely secret, extremely great secret. And what is so secret about it? It is that it is very difficult to comprehend it, very difficult to realize it. And so what is so difficult to realize here? It is that we cannot easily recognize that our own mind is the Buddha. If we do recognize it, then, also as Milarepa had said, consciousness, or the dualistic consciousness, becomes primordial awareness. So Milarepa had said, I do not see consciousness or dualistic consciousness, I only see primordial wisdom. So in the Pratimoksha path, in the Sutra path, in the Bodhisattva path, there is no empowerment. But in the Vajrayana, there is empowerment. And empowerment means mainly that awareness has to be empowered, as in must attain autonomy. Milarepa said that the outer empowerment is to have the vase placed onto your crown. The inner empowerment is to visualize your body in the form of the deity. Also, the significance of placing the vase on the crown is to recognize the true nature of your body, your aggregates, the aggregates, elements, and sense sources. When you cultivate bodhicitta, then all of these become the deity. As long as the mind is in an immature state, you continue to wander in the 6 realms of samsara. And so during the empowerment, we are introduced to this. So we enter the path of maturation by entering the practice of deity yoga, where we visualize the deity and recite the deity's mantra. So there are many divisions of aggregates, elements, sense sources, the 5 aggregates, and so on. There are so many, like a pile of sand, so like different sand grains. There's so many. And even though there are so many, when you transform your dualistic consciousness into primordial awareness, that all of this accumulation of these aggregates and so forth all become the deity. For example, if you have a pile of wood, when that wood encounters fire, then all of that wood turns into one big mass of fire. So that is the secrecy of the secret mantra. And so through the empowerment, we recognize it. Now I have recognized the secret, and that is the transformation of the consciousness into primordial wisdom. And once it transforms, your awareness attains freedom, autonomy. So even though we do say that the afflictive emotions are like a poison, they can also be utilized for practice. So again, in the Pratimoksha, individual liberation, we abandon the afflictions. In the Bodhisattva path, we transform them. And in the Vajrayana path, we recognize them. We recognize that the afflictions are primordial awareness. So how do you recognize that? For example, when you get very angry, and you do know the nature of the mind, then you're not angry at the other person. So you're a person who has already recognized the nature of the mind. Then within the anger, you find great clarity. And then actually, it has become very beneficial to you. And it's through practicing with the afflictive emotion that it transforms into primordial wisdom. Milarepa also said that aside from realizing the nature of your mind, there is no other perfection of wisdom than that. So where you are at with that, whether you can do that or not, you have to see for yourself. So for example, when this strong feeling of anger arises, if you are someone who has seen the nature of the mind, who can practice, then when anger arises, you would sustain the natural state of the mind with clear awareness, and that feeling of anger would completely dissolve. And what remains is a state of pristine clarity, a clear and empty state. And then you will actually recognize the quality of the anger. That is, without any hostility against someone else. That is free from all dualistic thoughts of self and other. And in the same way, you work with the other afflictions. And so in this way, the so-called 5 poisons can actually mature into the 5 wisdoms. And then your awareness attains freedom. So this is what we are introduced to during an empowerment. And so coming back to Milarepa's quote from before, so he said that the outer empowerment is to have the vase placed on your crown. The inner empowerment is to visualize your body as a deity. And then the ultimate, the actual empowerment is to recognize the natural state of your mind. And when you recognize it, then your awareness attains freedom. And then you're also able to bestow empowerment upon others. So the difference between the Mantrayana and the Sutrayana is empowerment.
대 람진 남다 단대 용진 인성요래 그 너가 저 왕리 왕시바데 가리 람진 남다 단대 용진 인시바데 샘 광은 내려오데 얘네 독지시나 예리 닦고 이제리 닦고 생방 까리 닦고 독치 까다시 그래 까다시 생방 이제리 딱 말이지 신이 예니 사제지나 미미라 미디시 그래 그 생방들이 네 남지 남다 예니 남지 남다 생방 이제리 닦고리시 까다리시 데려서 운장 로버트 좀 제서 사제에서는 다 로버트만 가다 차로 그래지 자랑대 효성들이 저거 윤진 사마 초코는 아니 요래 또좀 막으봐 요래 제들이 자세다더니 다 제시지는 되게 니모동아 신아 데라서 말았습니다. 들이 용진 탐지 사지 용진 탐지들이 생판 이제 대시 용코는 요래 들이 남지 남다 tran제 용진이서 그 강리디 자서 막게 송외 달라서 지양 메시 센티지 뭐 코로나 파사다 니바 진짜 요 말이 파사다 중적이야 요 말이스 저 야자 사진인데 저 야자 요 말이스 들어서다지 양 야과서와 지정 양다 니래 양다다 랑 생분내로 랑 따와 랑 생분내로 랑 통화 데레들이다 사진 용디들이 사진 용디 삼진 내 말이스.
And then the next line says, the utterly pure nature possesses the qualities of the result of separation. So those, what qualities are these? The qualities of the result of separation. In the Dzogchen teachings, it is said that the mind is primordially a state of primordial purity, or gadak. It also says that the mind primordially has the nature of Buddha. Mind itself is Buddha primordially. So the mind is primordially pure. However, as the Buddha had said, beings are obscured by adventitious stains. And these stains are like these ice blocks that we mentioned. So even though it is an ice block, all the qualities of the water are complete within the ice block. So the nature of the ice is still water. And the nature of the ice will never be affected by its change from liquidity to being frozen. It still is ice. And so similarly it is with the nature of the mind. So the 5 afflictive emotions are actually the 5 wisdoms. All the qualities of a Buddha are present in your mind, are present in your Buddha nature. Also, in Maitreya prayer, it says, there is not the slightest thing to be removed. So from Buddha nature, there is nothing that needs to be removed or purified. And there is not the slightest thing to add to it. So there is no fault that is to be removed, and there is no Buddhahood that needs to be added to it. It is perfect as it is. And so Maitreya says, therefore, when you truly view your mind, you will see your true nature. So when you truly look at your mind and view your true nature, you will observe that all a Buddha's qualities are already perfectly present.
그렇지 샘 대식 뭐 코랑 까고도 공이 다단 뒤에서 말이 세븐에로 데라코네 단지 용진에 사치 강감은 데서 말이 네 까빠통도 잡으면 봐요 rum이 지금은 무슨 세종이 다다 세븐에로 통수나 까빠도 참하고 데데요네 대사지 그게 되게 세조레스 대가들이 dum들이 독지지 dum들이 내가 취해서 dum들이 되네 dum들이 내가 가리지 저 동반이 차서는 되는지요 말이 똥지들 가리 똥성 다 진지로도 다 진지로 다진이 매와 차성 There is a less of the Delipina, Mega Chasm. There is a Tapato, Nelson in Sachi in the theatre of somebody, Tesam, Tata, Tranding, Tataman Tesam Glorious.
And so even though our mind is Buddha nature, then why is it that if our mind possesses all the perfect qualities of the Buddha, that we are still wandering in samsara? So the next verse says, it is the body that circles in samsara. And just one more word about the previous verse, the result of separation, so the qualities of the result of separation. What that means is it is also explained in the Ganges Mahamudra, the Gangama. In the Gangama it says, a single lamp flame illuminates the darkness of 1,000 aeons. And likewise, when you see the nature of your mind, the darkness that has lasted for hundreds of aeons, the darkness of negativities and obscurations will be cleared away in a single instant, in that moment when you see the nature of your mind. Also, and this is explained not only in Mahamudra, also in Dzogchen. So it says in the Dzogchen teachings, for instance, that it is through karma, the emptying of karma, that we recognize emptiness, the ultimate nature. So when the cause becomes empty, then no result can mature. And so what has it become empty of? The cause has become empty of the self-cherishing mind. So the mind has become free of dualistic thinking, self and other. There is no more duality between someone who accumulates karma and a karma to be accumulated. So in the Mahamudra teachings, it explains it this way, that when you see the nature of the mind, in this instant, all the negativities accumulated in thousands of aeons will be cleared away. So that is the meaning of your true nature possesses the qualities of the result of separation.
Yiri simi ina sanji jirang yidini, yungdi desa wada yina, zela dili dante yungdi di songla di, sanji yungdi samsi telang zhungwa yindi, mi na pele me toga saung cha jana, yang ma na chola cha jana, cho da zangma zangja, cho zangma dina, maka lungla lolo chogo, kareli beju tangla chogo yore pele, ya, cho zangma zangja cha suna. Tiri chada kasa kara song ji da che, ji ma bo da che na, tiri san zhu nang che pe zhu kang yo ma re, kang pe zhu yo ma re. Yang zha deng tang che le ka te, che de san zhu nang che tsokwa sama de zang ma zi le, yang zha che de ya le yo re. Pe ngi ne te re. O, sen zang kowe jang tu le ka se song la yang tiri, rang rang zang ma zo tira tiri, sen kong yong di zi, la ya yo ma re. Mi song sim lo to ra de de na, desik jang boda la ya yo ma re. There certainly Jesha me body. Second, they looked at them, certainly Jesha me ba, draw me but Namkada. Oh, simply part of what's on me ba. The Lani Sabina told me, Jenny to the Sancho Sabata, Grand Chukun draw me, simply the six part of what's on me. Jerry says, drawing me, Yakayam, drawing me ba, draw me ba. This of the second eruption of Jetta Yongti, Yongti Jetta, that's a day Yongti, seven erupted with Yongti.
So the nature of mind is primordially the Buddha, and all Buddha's qualities are present within that mind. And so these are the qualities of the result of separation. So all enlightened qualities arise from your own mind, when your own mind matures, just like the seed of a flower ripens into a flower. Or we can think about water. When water becomes completely purified, And so it's completely refined. You can even use it as eye drops, pour it into your eyes. Or you can use it in so many different ways. But then when the water spills all over and encounters different conditions, for example, if it is flushed down the toilet, then it's not so useful anymore. However, actually scientists nowadays, they are able to recycle even the toilet water. So they can, first it's polluted, dirty water, but they take this water and they purify it, and then we can use it again. And so similarly, no matter how long the mind wanders in the ocean of samsara, the qualities of Buddhahood within yourself will never be lost. Even if you spend thousands of years in the lower realms, Buddha nature will never become spoiled. It transcends birth and death. In the 37 Bodhisattva practices, in the very beginning it says, Jinrezig and the other bodhisattvas have realized that phenomena neither come nor go. So the mind neither comes nor goes, just like space. It is without arising and decline. So this is the quality of your true nature. And so realizing the quality of your true nature is what's called not to actualize these qualities of the result of separation. And so now I've shared a few words on the Gongchik with you to the best of my abilities, and you have an opportunity to ask questions to your own teacher there. And it's important to ask questions over and over again and really think about it. What I've shared with you was my own take on these verses. I myself do not have much learning, but you have teachers around you, and so therefore these teachers, this teacher has great qualities. The teacher is someone that possesses great diligence and wisdom. And so you have your Ken Rinpoche there that you can ask all of your questions. And so in this way, please continue your practice.
Sanjo Semjo Rinpoche Maje Bana Jeje Jeba Yama Mi Ba Yang Gong Le Gong De Be Wa Yu 산인자요.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.